300 people watched him shove his pregnant wife in front of the cameras. 300 people saw her stumble, saw the champagne glasses shatter around her swollen belly, saw the humiliation burning in her eyes, and not a single person stepped forward to help. But here is what no one in that ballroom knew. The woman they dismissed as weak, she was the secret genius who saved his company from bankruptcy. The wife he called worthless, she had evidence that could destroy his entire empire. And the man who humiliated her in front of Manhattan's elite, he had a first wife who died under very suspicious circumstances. What happens next will shock you, because Grace Holloway did not just survive that night. She came back, and she burned everything he built to the ground. But the twist at the end, the one involving her 80-year-old grandmother with dementia, I promise you will never see it coming. Stay with me until the very last word. This story will change how you see your own strength. Value statement. This is not just a story about revenge. This is a blueprint for every woman who has ever been told she was crazy, worthless, or too weak to fight back. If you take one thing from the next 100 minutes, let it be this. Your truth has power, even when the whole world refuses to believe you. Meaning of the story, Grace's journey proves something important. Abusers do not win because they are stronger. They win because they convince you that you are alone. The moment you find your people, the moment you start telling your truth out loud, their power begins to crumble. Lies need constant maintenance. Truth just needs time. What you will learn. By the end of this story, you will understand three things. First, how to recognize when someone is systematically dismantling your reality. Second, why documentation is your greatest weapon. And third, the exact moment when staying becomes more dangerous than leaving. The chandelier lights inside the Ritz-Carlton Manhattan glittered like frozen rain, casting sharp reflections across the marble floors. 300 of New York's most powerful people filled the ballroom, their laughter rising and falling like waves against the soft melody of a string quartet. Diamond necklaces caught the light. Champagne flutes clinked in practiced toasts. The air itself seemed to shimmer with wealth and influence. And in the center of all that glamour, Grace Holloway Vale stood perfectly still. Her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was 7 months pregnant. Her navy gown, carefully chosen to be elegant, but not attention-seeking, stretched across her growing belly. She had spent 3 hours getting ready for this night. 3 hours making sure every hair was in place, every word rehearsed, every smile practiced until her cheeks ached. None of it would matter. Her husband Nathaniel's fingers dug into her arm, hidden from view by the angle of their bodies. To the guests around them, they looked like the perfect couple, the tech billionaire and his beautiful wife, expecting their first child, a fairy tale written in silk and success. But Grace could feel the bruise forming under his grip. "You just cost me a $50 million deal." His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word landed like a slap. One question, one hesitation, and you ruined everything I have been working toward for months. Grace's mind raced backward, trying to understand. A donor had asked her about Vail Industries' new sustainability initiative. She had studied every report, memorized every talking point. But the donor mentioned a budget figure she had never seen, a detail Nathaniel had deliberately kept from her. Her hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds of uncertainty, and now his fingers were grinding against her bone. "I did not know about that budget," she whispered back, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You never told me about that number. How was I supposed to answer something I never knew?" Nathaniel's smile stayed frozen in place, but his eyes had gone cold, that familiar coldness that made her stomach drop. "You should have figured it out. You should have been prepared. Instead, you stood there like a deer in headlights, and made me look incompetent. I am sorry. The words came automatically now. 7 years of marriage had trained her well. I am so sorry. It will not happen again. But Nathaniel was not listening. He was scanning the room, calculating the damage, measuring the whispered conversations happening at nearby tables. 2 investors had exchanged glances during her stumble. He had seen it. He had cataloged it. And now the fury was building behind his practiced smile. "We are leaving," he said through clenched teeth. "Nathaniel, please, not in front of everyone. Can we just stay until the speech and then quietly go home? I promise I will make it up to you. I will call everyone tomorrow and apologize personally. Just please, not here. Not like this." She was begging now. She hated herself for begging, but the alternative was worse. The alternative was whatever came next when he lost control in public. For a moment, something flickered across his face. She thought maybe, just maybe, he would listen. Then a photographer turned toward them, camera raised, and Nathaniel snapped. It happened so fast that later, she would struggle to reconstruct the sequence. His hand released her arm. Both palms came up against her shoulders. A single, sharp shove. Grace stumbled backward. Her heel caught on the edge of her gown. Her hands flew out instinctively, one reaching for a nearby table, the other wrapping around her pregnant belly. Champagne glasses toppled. Crystal shattered against marble. The sound cut through the music like a gunshot. Every head in the ballroom turned. "Get out!" Nathaniel's voice was loud now, deliberately loud, carrying across the stunned silence. "You are an embarrassment to everything I have built. Get out of my sight!" Grace caught herself against the table, her palm pressing into broken glass. She felt the sharp sting, saw blood welling against her skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation crashing over her. 300 people were staring. 300 phones were rising. 300 witnesses to her destruction. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. What could she possibly say? What defense existed for a woman whose own husband had just thrown her away like garbage in front of Manhattan's elite? Someone gasped. Someone else whispered her name. The string quartet had stopped playing, the musicians frozen with their bows suspended in the air. Grace forced her legs to move, one step backward, then another. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of them. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of watching her cry. She turned and walked toward the ballroom doors, her spine straight, her chin lifted, her heart shattering into pieces with every step. The murmurs followed her like a wave. "Did you see that? She looks terrified. What a temper. Is she bleeding? Poor thing. She is pregnant." The whispers blurred together into white noise as Grace pushed through the heavy doors and stumbled into the corridor beyond. The hallway was quieter here, the chaos of the ballroom muffled by thick walls and expensive carpeting. She made it maybe 30 feet before her legs gave out. Grace sank against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor in her ruined gown. Her hands were shaking, her chest was heaving. The baby kicked inside her, and she wrapped both arms around her belly, trying to hold herself together. 7 years. 7 years she had told herself it would get better. 7 years she had made herself smaller and smaller until she forgot what her own voice sounded like. And now this. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out with trembling fingers and read the message from Nathaniel. "Get home now. We will discuss your performance tonight. Tomorrow you will issue an apology to every guest. And Grace, do not even think about doing anything stupid. Remember what is at stake." She stared at the message, her throat tight. Then she heard footsteps, not the sharp click of Nathaniel's expensive shoes. These were different, measured, deliberate, coming toward her with purpose. She looked up, expecting a security guard or a concerned staff member. Instead, she found herself staring at Marcus Reed, CEO of Reed Dynamics, Nathaniel's most ruthless business rival, a man she had been warned never to speak to, never to acknowledge, never to be seen anywhere near. He stopped a few feet away from her, his expression unreadable. He did not offer his hand. He did not crowd her space. He simply lowered himself until he was at her eye level and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of someone who was not afraid of anything. "Mrs. Vale, I am going to say something, and I need you to really hear it." She blinked at him, confused and defensive and desperately trying not to cry. "I know who actually wrote Vale Industries' 2019 Crisis Management Plan. I know who drafted the restructuring strategy that saved his company from bankruptcy, and I know that man just humiliated the most valuable person in his organization in front of every camera in Manhattan." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "How?" Her voice came out broken. "How do you know that?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Simple white cardstock, with a name and a phone number. Nothing else. "Because I have been looking for you for 3 years, and tonight, you just became free to listen." He pressed the card into her hand. His fingers were warm against her trembling palm. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked back toward the ballroom. Grace stared at the card. Before she could process what had just happened, her phone buzzed again. This time from a blocked number. A photo loaded slowly on the screen. Her grandmother Ruth, sitting in her wheelchair at the nursing home in Ohio. A man's shadow visible in the doorway behind her. The text beneath made Grace's blood run cold. "Come home quietly, or Grandma Ruth has a very bad night." Grace pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. She had no money, no allies she could reach, a grandmother being threatened, a baby growing inside her, and a husband who had just proven, in front of 300 witnesses, exactly what he was capable of. The card was still in her hand, Marcus Reed's number, burning against her palm like a question she did not yet know how to answer. But for now, there was only one choice. Grace Holloway Vale pushed herself off the floor, wiped the blood from her palm, and walked toward the elevator that would take her back to her gilded cage. The penthouse was dark when Grace arrived home. She stood in the foyer for a long moment, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered below, a carpet of lights stretching toward the horizon. From up here, the city looked beautiful, peaceful, like a dream someone else was having. Grace had stopped seeing the beauty years ago. Now she only saw the cage. "Sit down, Grace." Nathaniel's voice came from the living room. She turned toward it and found him waiting in his favorite chair, backlit by the city lights. 2 men she had never seen before stood behind him. Dark suits, expressionless faces, lawyers, she realized. Or something worse. She sat on the edge of the couch across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect. 7 years of training. "I want to explain what happened tonight," she began, but Nathaniel raised a hand. "I do not want your explanations. I want your signature." He nodded to one of the men, who stepped forward and placed a folder on the coffee table between them. Grace stared at it without touching it. "What is this?" Nathaniel smiled, that patient, patronizing smile that always preceded something terrible. 3 documents. He ticked them off on his fingers. First, a voluntary commitment to Pinecrest Wellness Retreat for pregnancy-related psychological disturbance. Second, a revised custody agreement granting me full decision-making authority over our child. Third, a financial declaration acknowledging your history of irresponsible spending and agreeing to supervised accounts. Grace felt the room tilt. Voluntary commitment? She could hear her voice rising, could hear the edge of hysteria creeping in. "You want me to commit myself to a psychiatric facility? I want you to get the help you obviously need." Nathaniel's tone was reasonable, concerned, almost gentle. What happened tonight was disturbing, Grace. You attacked me in front of 300 people. You had some kind of episode. Anyone watching could see you were not in your right mind. I attacked you. She was standing now, though she did not remember getting up. You shoved me. You pushed me in front of everyone, and I stumbled, and now you are calling that an attack? The two lawyers shifted slightly. Ready to intervene, if necessary, Nathaniel sighed. Did I push you? Or did you lunge at me and lose your balance? 300 people saw chaos, Grace. The cameras caught a blur. Reality is whatever I can afford to prove. The words landed like stones. And I can afford quite a lot. He let that sink in before continuing. Here's what happens next. You sign these papers tonight. Tomorrow, I tell everyone you had a severe anxiety episode brought on by pregnancy hormones. Very relatable, very sympathetic. You spend a few weeks at Pinecrest getting the rest you need. When you come home, we release a joint statement about your recovery. Everyone moves on. And if I refuse, then the video my security team is editing right now goes to TMZ by morning, the one that shows you attacking me before falling. My lawyers file for emergency custody based on your violent episode and documented psychiatric instability. Your face is on every tabloid in the country. And your grandmother? Nathaniel paused, letting the threat settle. Well, nursing homes can be dangerous places for elderly women with dementia. Accidents happen. Grace felt something crack inside her chest. She thought about the baby, about Ruth, about the life she had built, and the life that was being stolen from her. She thought about Marcus Reed's business card, still hidden in the lining of her clutch. She thought about running, fighting, screaming. Instead, she sat back down. Instead, she picked up the pen. If you're listening to this and you recognize something, recognize that slow suffocation of choice being stripped away piece by piece. I need you to understand. Sometimes signing is not surrender. Sometimes it is survival. You sign because you need to live another day. You sign because you are already planning your escape. You sign because the alternative is destruction, and you are not ready to be destroyed, not yet. Grace signed all 3 documents. Nathaniel smiled and collected the papers. I knew you would be reasonable. He kissed her forehead like she was a child who had finally behaved. The car will take you to Pinecrest tomorrow morning. Try to get some sleep. He left her alone in the dark living room. Grace sat there for a long time, staring at her hands. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out the business card. Marcus Reed's name glinted in the city light. She could not call him, not from this apartment. Nathaniel monitored every phone, every email, every text message. He had people watching her movements, her purchases, her social interactions. Calling Marcus from here would be suicide. But maybe at Pinecrest, maybe there would be an opportunity. Grace tucked the card into the waistband of her dress, against her skin where no one would think to look. Then she went to bed beside her husband and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Pinecrest Wellness Retreat looked like something from a brochure. Manicured lawns, white buildings with cheerful blue shutters. A reception area that smelled like lavender and featured calming watercolor paintings on every wall. Grace was not fooled for a second. She recognized the locks on the doors, the cameras in the corners, the way the staff smiled a little too brightly, their eyes tracking her movements with professional precision. This was not a wellness retreat. This was a place where powerful families sent inconvenient women to disappear. For 3 days, Grace was the perfect patient. She took her medication, except she did not. She had learned to palm pills in college, a stupid party trick that was now saving her sanity. The little blue capsules went under her tongue, then into the gap beside her mattress when the nurses were not looking. She attended therapy sessions. She said all the right things about feeling overwhelmed and needing support and being grateful for the chance to rest. She studied the facility, the shift changes, the locked doors, the one exit near the kitchen that seemed to be used for deliveries, the fire alarm panel, and the emergency evacuation routes posted in every hallway. And she watched for allies. She found one on her fourth night. Marlene Crawford was a night nurse in her 50s with kind eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair. She brought Grace extra pudding at 2 in the morning and did not ask questions about why Grace was always awake. On the fifth night, Marlene sat on the edge of Grace's bed and spoke quietly. "Honey, I have worked here 20 years. I know the difference between a crazy woman and a trapped one." Grace looked at her, heart pounding. "Which one am I?" Marlene smiled, but her eyes were sad. "You are the one who has been palming her sleeping pills for almost a week. Either you are planning something, or you are starting a pharmacy. Either way, I am rooting for you." The confession came pouring out. "My husband had me committed. He threatened my grandmother. He forged documents making me look unstable. I have no money, no phone, no way to reach anyone who might help. And I am 7 months pregnant with his child." Marlene listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. "I had a daughter once," Marlene said finally. "Similar situation. Different monster, but the same story. She got out. It took her 3 years and 2 restraining orders and moving across the country, but she got out. She has 3 kids now. A house in Colorado, a husband who has never once raised his voice to her." She looked directly at Grace. "You can get out too, but you have to be smart, and you have to be ready to fight." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I do not know how to fight someone like him. He has money, he has lawyers, he has the whole system rigged in his favor. Then you find someone who knows how to fight back." Marlene pulled a small slip of paper from her pocket and pressed it into Grace's hand. "Fire inspection is scheduled for next Tuesday. East Wing evacuation. 40 minutes of chaos. The service door near the kitchen has a faulty lock that maintenance has been meaning to fix for 6 months." Grace stared at her. "Why are you helping me?" Marlene stood and straightened her uniform. "Because 20 years ago, someone helped my daughter, and I have been waiting a long time to pay that forward." She paused at the door. "One more thing. That business card you have been hiding, the name on it is a good one. Marcus Reed has been quietly helping women like you for over a decade. His mother died in a place like this. He is not forgotten." Grace's hand moved instinctively to her waistband, where the card was still tucked against her skin. "How did you know?" Marlene smiled. "Honey, I told you. I have been doing this for 20 years. Get some sleep. Tuesday is coming." Tuesday arrived wrapped in cold November rain. Grace had spent every moment since her conversation with Marlene preparing. She memorized the facility layout. She studied the shift schedules posted outside the nurse's station. She traced the route from her room to the kitchen to the service door in her mind until she could walk it with her eyes closed. The flash drive from Caroline Wells, Nathaniel's executive assistant, was still hidden in a hollowed-out bar of soap in her bathroom. Caroline had visited 2 days earlier, supposedly to bring Grace some personal items. In reality, she had smuggled in 15 years of evidence against Nathaniel, pressing the drive into Grace's palm with shaking hands. "I was you once," Caroline had whispered. "Different man, same monster. Do not let him win." Now Grace sat on her bed, watching the clock on her wall tick toward 9 in the morning. The fire inspection was scheduled for 9:15. 40 minutes of evacuation chaos. 40 minutes to disappear. The alarm shrieked through the building, right on schedule. Staff members rushed down the hallway, their voices overlapping with instructions and reassurances. Patients were guided toward the courtyard. Doors that were usually locked swung open. The careful order of the facility dissolved into controlled chaos. Grace moved. She slipped out of her room and turned left instead of right, away from the courtyard and toward the kitchen. Her slippers made no sound on the linoleum floor. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain everyone could hear it. The kitchen was empty. The service door was exactly where Marlene had said it would be. Grace pressed against the handle, felt it give, and pushed through into the cold morning air. Freedom. The words sang through her mind as she hurried across the staff parking lot. Rain soaked through her thin hospital clothes within seconds. She was freezing, 7 months pregnant, and had nothing except a flash drive and a business card. It did not matter. She was out. The bus station was half a mile away. Grace had memorized the route from the facility's address. She would get to Manhattan, find Diana Sullivan, her college roommate, and call Marcus Reed from somewhere safe. She reached the bus station just as a payphone came into view. Her fingers were numb from the cold, but she managed to punch in the number from Marcus's card. It rang twice. Reed Dynamics, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with Marcus Reed. Grace's voice was shaking. Tell him it is Grace Vale. Tell him I got out. Tell him I need help. A pause. Then, please hold. 30 seconds of silence. Then Marcus's voice, sharp and alert. Grace, where are you? Bus station outside Pinecrest. I escaped during a fire drill. I have evidence. I have everything. But I need somewhere safe to go. I need help. Listen to me carefully. Marcus's voice was calm, steady, exactly what she needed to hear. There is a diner 3 blocks north of the station called Henderson's. Go there. Order coffee. Stay visible. I will have someone there within the hour. Thank you. She was crying now, tears mixing with rain on her face. Thank you so much. She hung up and started walking north. The diner was small and warm and smelled like bacon grease and old coffee. Grace slid into a booth near the window and ordered a cup of decaf with trembling hands. The waitress looked at her wet hospital clothes and swollen belly, but said nothing. Perhaps she had seen stranger things. Perhaps she knew better than to ask. Grace watched the parking lot through the rain-streaked window. She allowed herself, for the first time in months, to hope. 45 minutes later, headlights swept across the parking lot. Grace straightened, her heart leaping. The hour was almost up. Marcus had said someone would come. The vehicle that pulled into view was not a sedan or a town car. It was a black SUV with tinted windows. Then another one appeared behind it. Then a third. Grace's blood turned to ice. The SUV doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out, moving with the coordinated precision of a security team. And walking toward the diner entrance, phone in hand, was Marcus Reed. No. The word formed in her mind but did not reach her lips. No, 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 this cannot be happening. Marcus stepped through the diner door. His eyes found her immediately. For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. Then he spoke the words that shattered everything. I am sorry, Grace. He offered me something I could not refuse. The security team surrounded her booth before she could move. Grace's vision tunneled. She heard herself screaming, heard the waitress shouting for someone to call the police, heard Marcus's voice, cutting through the chaos, saying something about a medical emergency and psychiatric care. None of it mattered. Strong hands gripped her arms. Someone pressed a needle into her shoulder. The world went soft and blurry at the edges. The last thing she saw, before unconsciousness claimed her, was Marcus Reed turning away, unable to meet her eyes. And then there was nothing. Here is what I learned in that moment. Here is what I want you to understand if you have ever trusted someone who betrayed you. It was not your fault for believing them. The fault belongs to the person who chose to lie. You are not stupid for hoping. You are human. The capacity to trust, even when that trust is broken, is not weakness. It is the thing that makes us worth saving. Grace woke up in a different room, smaller, no windows, a single bed bolted to the floor, a camera in the corner, watching her with its unblinking red eye. Solitary observation, the nurse explained when Grace asked. For your own safety, Mrs. Vale. You had quite an episode. Grace did not argue, did not scream, did not cry. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The flash drive was gone, confiscated during her capture, no doubt already in Nathaniel's hands. Marcus Reed was not her ally. He was another weapon in her husband's arsenal. And now she was trapped in a room with no windows, no phone, and no way out. The second peak of despair had arrived, and Grace had nothing left to do but fall. Nathaniel visited 3 days later. He stood in the doorway of her solitary room, backlit by the harsh, fluorescent lights of the hallway. His suit was perfectly pressed. His smile was perfectly calibrated. Even here, in a psychiatric facility, he looked like he belonged on a magazine cover. Grace did not get up from the bed. You know what hurts me, Grace? Nathaniel stepped inside and let the door close behind him. What really, genuinely hurts me, it is that you do not trust me to take care of you. I have given you everything, a home, status, security, a child, and you ran? She stared at the wall above his shoulder. I trusted Marcus Reed. She was surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. I thought he was going to help me. Nathaniel laughed softly. Marcus and I go way back. Rivals in public, business partners in private. He has been feeding me information about you for months. Every conversation, every document, every pathetic little escape plan. Her stomach turned. Everything. He knew everything. The baby comes in 8 weeks, Nathaniel continued. After that, you will sign the divorce papers I have prepared. You will accept supervised visitation. And you will quietly disappear back to Ohio, where you can tell everyone whatever story helps you sleep at night. He crouched beside her bed, bringing his face close to hers. Or you can keep fighting. But I should warn you, the longer you fight, the harder it gets. My lawyers are already documenting your instability. The escape attempt was very helpful. The psychotic episode in the diner? Even better. By the time I am finished, no court in the country will give you custody of this child. Grace felt something shift inside her chest, a crack forming in the foundation of everything she thought she knew about survival. I was trying to protect our baby from you, she whispered. Nathaniel's smile did not falter. And I am trying to protect our baby from you. See how that works? 2 stories, 2 truths, but only one of us has the resources to make their story stick. He stood, smoothing his jacket. The staff says you have been cooperative. That is good. Keep it up. Get some rest. And Grace? He paused at the door. Try to remember. I always win. It is just who I am. He left her alone in the silent room. For a long time, Grace did not move. She thought about her parents, her father, who had died when she was 16. His hands, rough, from decades of work, but always gentle, when he touched her face. Her mother, who had fought cancer until her very last breath, whispering, I am so proud of you, even as the light faded from her eyes. She thought about her grandmother Ruth, alone in a nursing home in Ohio, threatened by a man she had never met because she had the misfortune of being loved by his wife. She thought about the baby, this tiny life growing inside her, innocent of everything, deserving of so much more than a father who used people like chess pieces, and a mother who could not figure out how to escape. The despair settled over her like a physical weight, pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. This is the moment they count on. If you have ever been where I was, you know exactly what I mean. It is the moment you start to believe that maybe they are right. Maybe you really are crazy. Maybe the easier path is just giving up. I need you to hear something important. That moment is a lie. It is the darkest part of the tunnel, and the only way out is through. 2 weeks passed. Grace became the model patient. She took her medication without complaint. She attended every therapy session and said all the right things. She smiled at the nurses and thanked the staff and never once mentioned escape or evidence or Nathaniel's crimes. She was waiting. On a cold Tuesday morning, Caroline Wells returned. This time, there were no smuggled documents, no flash drives hidden in soap. Caroline sat across from Grace in the visiting room and spoke in a whisper, so soft it was barely audible. "I have been trying to reach you," Caroline said. "After what happened at the diner, Nathaniel thinks I am loyal to him. He does not know I still have copies of everything." Grace kept her expression neutral, aware of the cameras in every corner. Marcus Reed was not really working for him. Grace stiffened. "What?" "It was a test." Caroline's eyes were urgent. "Marcus needed to know if you would break under pressure or if you would keep fighting. Nathaniel was watching everything. If Marcus had successfully helped you escape, Nathaniel would have known immediately that he was the leak. This way, Nathaniel thinks Marcus is his ally." Grace's mind raced, trying to recalibrate everything she thought she knew. "But Marcus handed me over to Nathaniel's security team. I was drugged. I woke up in solitary. I know, and I know how terrible that was." Caroline reached across the table and touched Grace's hand briefly. "But Marcus is playing a long game. He has been building cases against men like Nathaniel for over 15 years. His mother died in a facility just like this one. His father committed her to cover up years of abuse. Marcus has not forgotten." Grace felt something stir in her chest, something that might have been hope, if she could still remember what hope felt like. "Why should I believe any of this? Because there is another fire inspection scheduled for next Thursday." Caroline's voice dropped even lower. "Because Marlene Crawford is still working the night shift. And because Marcus Reed will be waiting outside with a car, a lawyer, and enough resources to fight back." She squeezed Grace's hand. "You have to trust someone, Grace. Not because they have proven themselves, not because you know for certain they will not betray you, but because the alternative is dying in this room, alone, having never even tried." Caroline stood, gathering her things. "Thursday," she said. "Be ready." Then she walked out of the visiting room, leaving Grace alone with the cameras and the guards and a decision that could save her life or destroy it completely. Trust was a luxury Grace could not afford, but neither was giving up. She spent the next 9 days preparing. Thursday dawned gray and cold. Grace woke before the sun rose, her heart already racing. She had slept maybe 2 hours, her mind churning through scenarios and contingencies. Everything could go wrong. Marcus could betray her again. The fire inspection could be canceled. Marlene could have been transferred to a different shift. 1,000 things could destroy this fragile chance. But 1,000 things could also go right. Grace dressed in the clothes she had been saving, a simple sweater and loose pants that Caroline had smuggled in during her last visit, sturdy shoes instead of the thin hospital slippers. She had hidden granola bars and a bottle of water in the space behind her mattress. The flash drive was gone, but the evidence on it existed in other places. Caroline had copies. Marcus had copies. The proof of Nathaniel's crimes had not disappeared with that single device. And Grace had something else, something she had been building piece by piece during her weeks of model behavior. A map of every camera, blind spot in the facility. The fire alarm screamed at exactly 9:15, just like before. Grace moved. This time, she did not go straight to the kitchen. She went to the medication room first, ducking into the blind spot she had identified between two cameras. The door was locked, but the lock was old, and she had spent hours learning how to manipulate it with a hairpin she had hidden in her mattress seam. Inside, she grabbed a bottle of the sedatives she had been pretending to take for weeks. Then she continued toward the kitchen, staying in the shadows, timing her movements to the chaos of the evacuation. The kitchen was empty. The service door opened without resistance, and standing in the parking lot, leaning against a dark sedan, was Marcus Reed. Grace froze. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Grace standing in the doorway, 8 months pregnant, trembling with cold and fear. Marcus waiting beside the car, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "I know you have no reason to trust me." His voice was quiet, but steady. "I know what happened at the diner felt like the worst betrayal of your life. And I know that nothing I say right now will undo that." Grace did not move, but "I need you to understand something." Marcus stepped forward, slowly, his hands visible and open. "My mother's name was Catherine Reed. She died in a facility very much like this one when I was 17 years old. My father committed her to hide what he was doing to her. The official cause of death was suicide. But I know the truth. I have always known." His jaw tightened. "I have spent the last 18 years building cases against men like your husband. Men who use power and money to trap women. Men who turn the system into a weapon. I could not save my mother. But I have saved 47 others. You can be 48. Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks, warm against her cold skin. "How do I know this is not another test? How do I know Nathaniel is not watching right now, waiting for me to trust you so he can crush me again?" "You do not know." Marcus's voice was raw with honesty. "That is the terrible truth. You cannot know for certain. You can only decide whether the chance of freedom is worth the risk of another fall." He opened the car door. "Your friend, Diana Sullivan, is waiting at her apartment in Brooklyn. A lawyer named Janet Price has already agreed to take your case, and your grandmother Ruth is safe. I have a security team watching her nursing home around the clock." Grace stared at him. She thought about everything she had lost, everything she had survived, everything that was waiting for her if she got in that car. She thought about her baby, due in just 6 weeks, innocent and precious, and deserving of a mother who refused to stop fighting. Then she walked across the parking lot and got in the car. Marcus slid into the driver's seat and pulled out of the lot before anyone from the facility could react. "Where are we going?" Grace asked, her voice shaking. "Brooklyn," Marcus replied. "And then we start planning how to destroy Nathaniel Vale." Grace leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe. The drive to Brooklyn took nearly 2 hours through morning traffic. Grace spent most of it staring out the window, watching the suburban landscape give way to highways, and then to the familiar chaos of New York City. Marcus did not try to fill the silence with conversation. He seemed to understand that she needed time to process, to recalibrate, to begin believing that this was real. When they finally pulled up outside a brownstone in Park Slope, Grace's heart was pounding. "This is Diana's place," Marcus said. "I will wait here until you are settled." Grace opened the car door, then hesitated. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. "I do not know if I can ever fully trust you, but thank you for giving me another chance." Marcus nodded. "You would have given yourself another chance. I just provided the transportation." Grace climbed the steps to the brownstone's front door. Her legs were shaking. Her hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. She raised her fist and knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. The door swung open, and Diana Sullivan stood there, staring at her with an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to overwhelming relief in the space of a single heartbeat. Grace? Grace burst into tears. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I believed him when he said you were jealous of us. I believed him when he said I did not need anyone except him. I stopped calling, and I stopped writing, and I let him convince me that everyone who loved me was actually my enemy, and I am so, so sorry. Diana pulled her inside and wrapped both arms around her. Stop. Stop apologizing. Diana's voice cracked with emotion. I have been trying to reach you for 4 years. I called, I emailed, I showed up at your building, and security turned me away every single time. I never stopped trying, Grace. I never stopped believing you would come back. They stood in the entryway, holding each other, crying together. After 4 years of silence, the sisterhood had begun again. Diana's apartment was small and cluttered, and absolutely perfect. There were books stacked on every surface. Post-it notes covered the refrigerator with reminders and case notes and a few terrible drawings that Diana's nephew had given her. The couch was worn and comfortable and exactly the kind of place where a person could finally feel safe. Grace spent the first 2 days just sleeping, her body pushed to its limits by stress and pregnancy, and weeks of institutional food demanded rest. She slept for 12 hours at a stretch, waking only to eat whatever Diana placed in front of her before drifting off again. On the 3rd day, she was ready to fight. Diana had transformed her dining room table into a war room. Documents covered every inch of surface. A whiteboard leaned against the wall, covered in names and dates and connecting lines. Marcus Reed had sent over boxes of evidence that Caroline Wells had been compiling for years. So let me make sure I understand the situation. Diana stood at the whiteboard with a marker in her hand. Your husband has been cooking the books at Vale Industries for at least 2 years. He forged your signature on loan documents that make you personally liable for $40 million in debt. He had you committed to a psychiatric facility without proper medical justification, and he is currently threatening your grandmother in an Ohio nursing home. Grace nodded, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. That about covers it. Diana wrote another line on the whiteboard. Also, his first wife, Helen, died under suspicious circumstances 10 years ago. Grace's head snapped up. What? Marcus's team found the records this morning. Diana's voice was grim. Helen Mercer married Nathaniel in 2005. They divorced in 2008 after she was briefly committed to a psychiatric facility. Sound familiar? Grace felt cold spreading through her chest. 2 years later, Helen fell from her apartment balcony the night before she was scheduled to give a press interview about Nathaniel's business practices. The police ruled it suicide. No investigation. For a long moment, Grace could not speak. He killed her. The words came out barely above a whisper. He actually killed her. We cannot prove that. Diana's tone was careful. Not yet. But we can prove everything else. And once the world knows who Nathaniel Vale really is, someone might come forward with information about Helen. The front door opened, and Janet Price walked in. Janet was in her 50s, sharp-featured and sharp-tongued, a former federal prosecutor who now specialized in high-profile divorce cases. She had agreed to take Grace's case pro bono after reviewing the evidence. I just got off the phone with a contact at the FBI, Janet announced, dropping her briefcase on the one clear corner of the table. They are interested in the financial fraud angle. Very interested. If we can get them solid evidence of the forged signatures and falsified audits, they will open a federal investigation. Grace felt a spark of hope flicker to life in her chest. And the custody situation? Janet's expression tightened. That is more complicated. Nathaniel has already filed for sole custody based on your psychiatric history. We need to prove that the commitment was coerced and medically unjustified, which means getting testimony from staff at Pinecrest. Marlene Crawford, Grace said immediately. She's a nurse there. She helped me escape. She saw everything. Then we need to get her deposition as soon as possible. Janet made a note. Before Nathaniel figures out she is an ally and has her fired, or worse. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Grace gave statements to Janet. She provided detailed accounts of every threat, every manipulation, every instance of financial control. She documented the timeline of her marriage, showing how Nathaniel had systematically isolated her from friends and family, controlled her access to money, and undermined her professional contributions to his company. Caroline Wells came forward officially, providing copies of everything she had been saving for years. Financial records, email chains, witness statements from former employees who had been threatened into silence. Most damning of all, documentation proving that Nathaniel had forged Grace's signature on loan documents, making her personally liable for $40 million in debt she had never agreed to. Marcus's team found 3 former executive assistants who agreed to testify about harassment. A forensic accountant who had been fired in 2019 after questioning financial irregularities. A security guard who had witnessed Nathaniel threatening Helen Mercer 2 weeks before her death. Piece by piece, the case against Nathaniel Vale took shape. And then, just when everything seemed to be falling into place, the counterattack came. Grace woke on a Wednesday morning to her phone exploding with notifications. Headlines everywhere. On every news site, every gossip blog, every social media platform. Unstable wife of tech CEO escapes psychiatric care. Vale Industries releases shocking video of disturbed spouse. Sources say Grace Holloway has history of fabricating abuse claims. Grace scrolled through the articles with trembling fingers. Nathaniel had released a doctored video from the gala, edited to show Grace lunging at him. Before stumbling backward, he had leaked medical records claiming she had borderline personality disorder. He had found a former coworker who claimed Grace had once threatened her at the office. The FBI contact, the one Janet had been working with, had apparently been on Nathaniel's payroll all along. The evidence they had provided was now marked as compromised and inadmissible. Everything they had built was crumbling. Diana found Grace sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at her phone. "It is over." Grace's voice was hollow. "He wins. He always wins." Diana sat down beside her on the cold tile. "When I was in law school," Diana said quietly, "I represented a woman in immigration court. Her husband was connected, powerful. The government believed him over her. We lost the first hearing, and the appeal, and the second appeal." Grace did not respond. "Do you know where she is now?" Diana continued. "She is a partner at an immigration firm in Chicago. She has 3 kids, a house with a garden, a husband who has never raised his voice to her." She turned to look at Grace directly. She did not win because the system worked. She won because she refused to stop existing. Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I do not know how to keep existing." Diana took her hand and squeezed. "That is why you have me." The nursing home in Ohio smelled like lavender and memories. Grace walked through the familiar hallways with Diana beside her, past the reception desk where nurses smiled in recognition, past the common room where residents played cards and watched television, to the private room at the end of the East Wing. Ruth Holloway was sitting in her wheelchair by the window when Grace arrived. At 78 years old, Ruth had good days and bad days. Today, based on the clarity in her eyes when she turned toward the door, was a good day. "My Gracie," Ruth's face transformed with joy. "Come here, sweetheart. Let me look at you." Grace crossed the room and knelt beside her grandmother's chair, taking Ruth's papery hands in her own. "Hi, Grandma." Ruth touched Grace's face with trembling fingers. "You look tired. Is that husband of yours working you too hard?" Grace swallowed hard. Something like that. For a long moment, Ruth studied her granddaughter's face. Then something shifted in her expression. The pleasant vagueness that usually softened her features sharpened into something fierce. "I know that look," Ruth said quietly. "Your grandfather gave me that look for 22 years. Grace froze. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" Ruth's grip tightened on Grace's hands. "Everyone thought he was wonderful. Church every Sunday, coached the Little League, brought me flowers every Thursday." Ruth's voice hardened. "And every other night, he made me feel like I was nothing." Grace stared at her grandmother with new eyes. She had heard stories about Grandpa Harold, always about what a good man he was, what a pillar of the community, how much Ruth had loved him. "I stayed because I thought I had no choice," Ruth continued. "I stayed because the world told me that was what a good wife does. I stayed until the day he died. Do you know what I felt when they told me he was gone?" Grace shook her head. Relief. Ruth's eyes filled with tears that did not fall. "I felt relief, and then I felt 60 years of fury I had been too scared to feel." She reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out an envelope, yellow with age, sealed with tape that had long since lost its adhesive. "I have been waiting to give you this," Ruth said. "I saved it from the house before your mother sold it." Grace opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a savings account statement. The account had been opened in 1962 in Ruth's maiden name. Contributions had been made every month. Small amounts that added up over decades. The current balance was $180,000. "My mother left me this," Ruth explained. "Your grandfather never knew it existed. I kept it for an emergency that never came." "But baby girl," she cupped Grace's face in her hands, "you are my emergency. Take it, fight, and never, ever let that man make you feel small again." Grace broke down, sobbing. She cried for herself, for Ruth, for all the women who had stayed silent because the world told them that was what good wives did. If you have family, anyone, I need you to hear this. Tell them, even if you have lost touch, even if you are ashamed, even if you think they cannot help. You would be amazed how many people are waiting to save you. But they cannot help if they do not know. Grace stayed with Ruth for 3 more hours. They talked about everything, about Grace's mother, who had died too young, about Ruth's marriage, the truth of it laid bare after 60 years of silence, about the baby, due in just 4 weeks, who deserved a mother strong enough to fight for her. When Grace finally left, she carried the envelope in her purse and something far more valuable in her heart. 60 years of fury. The drive back to New York felt different. Grace sat in the passenger seat while Diana drove, watching the Ohio farmland give way to Pennsylvania highways and then to the approaching skyline of Manhattan. "I have been approaching this all wrong," Grace said suddenly. Diana glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "I have been playing defense, responding to Nathaniel's attacks, trying to prove he is lying, but he controls the narrative because I keep letting him set the terms." Diana nodded slowly. "Go on." "He is hosting the Vail Industries 20th anniversary gala in 2 weeks. Every investor, every board member, every media outlet in the city will be there. It is supposed to be his coronation, his moment of ultimate triumph." Grace turned to look at her friend. "What if we made it something else?" Diana raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like his funeral." A slow smile spread across Diana's face. "I am listening." Grace leaned forward, the pieces of a plan clicking together in her mind. "Listen, we do not need the FBI. We do not need the press to believe us before we speak. We need every person Nathaniel has ever silenced to tell their truth at the same time, in a place he cannot escape. in front of an audience he cannot dismiss. The gala. Exactly. His stage becomes our stage. His triumph becomes his destruction. Diana was quiet for a moment, considering. It could work, she said finally, but the logistics would be insane, getting everyone there without Nathaniel knowing, coordinating testimony from multiple witnesses, making sure the media captures everything before his lawyers can shut it down. Grace thought about Ruth, about 60 years of silence finally breaking. Can you help me make it happen? Diana reached over and squeezed her hand. Honey, I have been waiting 4 years to watch you burn that man to the ground. Let us get to work. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of Grace's life. She was 9 months pregnant, due any day. Her body ached. Her feet swelled. She slept in 30-minute increments between planning sessions. None of it mattered, because piece by piece, witness by witness, she was building an army. Rebecca Thornton came first. She had been Nathaniel's executive assistant from 2008 to 2011. She had signed an NDA when she left, accepting a small settlement in exchange for her silence. But NDAs did not cover criminal activity. Rebecca sat in Diana's living room, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, and told her story. The harassment, the intimidation, the night Nathaniel had cornered her in his office and made it clear that her career depended on her cooperation. I have been waiting 10 years for someone to believe me, Rebecca said. Whatever you need me to do, I am in. Melissa Carter was next, then Amanda Lawson. 3 former assistants, 3 remarkably similar stories, 3 women who had carried their silence like stones in their pockets. William Brady, the forensic accountant, who had been fired for questioning irregularities, provided documentation that proved Nathaniel had been falsifying audit reports since at least 2017. Caroline Wells, brave Caroline who had risked everything to smuggle evidence out of Vail Industries, agreed to go on record. And then there was Patricia Mercer, Helen Mercer's younger sister. Patricia arrived at Diana's apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, looking like she had not slept in days. She was 42 years old, a teacher from Connecticut, and she had spent the last 10 years trying to convince anyone who would listen that her sister did not commit suicide. Helen was building a case, Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. She had documents, evidence. She was going to expose him for what he really was. And then she fell from her balcony the night before her interview. Grace reached across the table and took Patricia's hand. Do you have any proof? Anything that could connect Nathaniel to what happened? Patricia shook her head. The police never investigated properly. They took Nathaniel's statement at face value. He had an alibi. He was at a business dinner. His lawyers made sure there were no questions. Grace thought about Ruth, about what her grandmother had seen in 2010. What if there was a witness? Patricia's eyes widened. What do you mean? Grace hesitated. This was a risk, a huge risk. Ruth's testimony would be challenged because of her dementia. Nathaniel's lawyers would tear her apart. But some truths needed to be told, regardless of the cost. My grandmother was visiting New York in 2010, Grace said slowly. She was staying at a hotel a few blocks from Helen's apartment. She saw something that night, something she has never told anyone. Patricia leaned forward, trembling. What did she see? Grace took a deep breath. She saw Nathaniel on Helen's balcony, and she saw him push. The sound that Patricia made was somewhere between a sob and a scream. 10 years of grief and suspicion condensing into a single moment of terrible confirmation. Grace held her while she cried. When Patricia could finally speak again, her voice was steady with determination. Whatever you need me to do at that gala, she said, I will do it, for Helen. The day before the gala, Grace assembled her team for a final review. They gathered in Diana's apartment. Grace, Diana, Janet Price, Caroline Wells, Marcus Reed, and representatives from each of the witnesses who would be testifying. Tomorrow night, Grace said, standing at the whiteboard with a marker in her hand, Nathaniel Vale hosts the celebration of his career. Every investor, every board member, every major media outlet in the city will be there. And we are going to give them a show they will never forget. She outlined the plan. Marcus's security team would ensure that all witnesses gained access to the venue without being flagged by Nathaniel's people. Janet had arranged for multiple journalists to be present, some aware of what was coming, and others just expecting a standard corporate event. Diana would coordinate the technical elements, making sure the evidence appeared on every screen in the ballroom at exactly the right moment. And Grace would walk in the front door and take the stage. There was a knock at the door. Diana answered it and returned with a look of surprise on her face. Grace, you have a visitor. Standing in the doorway was Marlene Crawford. The nurse who had helped Grace escape was still wearing her hospital scrubs. She had driven 6 hours from Pinecrest to be here. I quit my job this morning, Marlene said. Figured if you are going to burn him down, you might need someone who can testify about what really happens in that facility. Grace crossed the room and hugged her. Thank you, she whispered. Marlene hugged her back, careful of her pregnant belly. My daughter told me something once. She said the only thing worse than being trapped is watching someone else be trapped and doing nothing. She pulled back and looked at Grace with fierce eyes. Tomorrow, we do something. That night, Grace could not sleep. She lay in Diana's guest room, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick and roll inside her. In just a few hours, everything would change. Either she would destroy Nathaniel, or he would find a way to destroy her. There was no middle ground. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts to put Grace through school. About her father, who had taught her to change a tire and balance a checkbook and never back down from a fight. About Ruth, who had endured 60 years of silence and emerged on the other side with $180,000 and a spine made of steel. I am not alone, Grace whispered to her baby. I was never alone. I just forgot for a while. She finally drifted off around 3 a.m. When she woke up, it was time. The Plaza Hotel gleamed against the December night. Grace stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the facade with its elegant arches and golden lights. Somewhere inside, 300 of New York's most powerful people were gathering to celebrate Nathaniel Vale's triumph. They were about to witness his destruction instead. She was wearing a red dress, not hiding, not shrinking, 9 months pregnant and ready to fight. Diana appeared beside her, phone in hand. Everyone is in position. The witnesses are scattered throughout the venue. Journalists are ready. Marcus has his team monitoring all exits in case Nathaniel tries to run. Grace nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Janet Price approached from the other direction. The FBI agreed to have agents standing by, Janet said. Not inside the venue, but close enough that they can move quickly if things go well. If we get testimony about Helen Mercer's death, they will treat it as an active investigation. Grace took a deep breath, then let us go give them something to investigate. She walked up the steps and through the entrance, flanked by Diana and Janet on either side. The ballroom was everything she remembered from events past: crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns, all of them smiling and networking and playing their parts in the theater of wealth. And there, at the center of it all, stood Nathaniel Vale. He saw her immediately. Grace watched the expressions cycle across his face: shock, fury, then that practiced calm that she had learned to fear. He approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Grace, what a surprise. I did not expect you to be well enough to attend. I am perfectly well, Nathaniel. Better than I have been in years. His smile tightened. We should talk privately. Actually, Grace said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, I think we should talk very publicly. She turned and walked toward the stage where Nathaniel was supposed to give his anniversary speech. The crowd parted around her, confused, curious, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Grace climbed the steps to the stage. She took the microphone from its stand. She looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of people who had spent years believing Nathaniel's carefully crafted lies. Good evening, she said, her voice steady and clear. For those who do not know me, I am Grace Holloway Vale, though not for much longer. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel pushed toward the stage, but Marcus's security team subtly blocked his path. 20 years ago, Nathaniel Vale founded this company, Grace continued, and for 20 years, he has told a beautiful story about innovation, philanthropy, and family values. She pulled a small remote from her clutch. Tonight, I am going to tell you a different story, a true one. She pressed the button. Every screen in the ballroom lit up simultaneously. Financial documents, email chains, witness statements, evidence compiled over months of investigation. This is proof of systematic fraud within Vale Industries, Grace announced as the crowd gasped at the scrolling documents, falsified audits, misappropriated investor funds, and documents forged with my signature, making me personally liable for $40 million in debt I never agreed to. The room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted questions. Investors grabbed their phones. Journalists pushed toward the stage, cameras flashing. But Grace was not done. The screens changed. A photograph appeared. A woman with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. This is Helen Mercer, Grace said, Nathaniel's first wife, the one you never hear about. She died in 2010. The police called it suicide. She was about to expose everything I'm showing you tonight. Someone screamed. Nathaniel lunged toward the stage, fighting against the security team blocking him. She is lying. His voice cracked with panic. She is mentally ill. Someone stop her! But the witnesses were already stepping forward. Rebecca Thornton took the microphone first. She spoke about the harassment, the intimidation, the night Nathaniel had cornered her in his office. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. Melissa Carter was next, then Amanda Lawson, then William Brady with his financial evidence, then Caroline Wells, who had risked everything to gather the proof. One by one, they told their truth. By the time Patricia Mercer stepped up to the microphone, the room had fallen silent. My sister Helen was not suicidal, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. She was scared, yes, but she was also brave. She was building a case against Nathaniel. She was going to expose him. And then she fell from her balcony the night before she could speak. Patricia looked directly at Nathaniel. I have spent 10 years believing I would never know what really happened. But tonight, I finally do. The ballroom doors opened. An elderly woman in a wheelchair was pushed into the room by a nurse in hospital scrubs. Ruth Holloway, looking small and fragile, but with steel in her eyes. I may have dementia, Ruth announced, in a voice that carried across the silent ballroom, but I remember what I saw in 2010. I was visiting New York. I was staying at a hotel near that poor woman's apartment. She pointed directly at Nathaniel. I saw that man on Helen's balcony, and I saw him push her. The room exploded. Nathaniel was screaming now, fighting against the security team, his face contorted with rage and terror. His lawyer, Richard Blake, rushed forward, phone in hand, shouting something about emergency court orders and defamation. But it was too late. The doors burst open again, and federal agents poured into the ballroom. At their head was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and an expression of grim satisfaction. Nathaniel Vale, Special Agent Patricia Kowalski, announced, "You are under arrest for securities fraud, witness intimidation, and suspicion of homicide in the death of Helen Mercer Vale. Nathaniel's face went white. That is impossible. There was no investigation. There is now. Agent Kowalski stepped forward. We reopened the case 3 weeks ago, based on evidence provided by a very persistent forensic accountant. She looked at Grace with something like respect. Nathaniel was handcuffed, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. He screamed for his lawyers, for his board, for anyone to help him. No one moved. Grace stood on the stage, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, watching the man who had controlled her life for 7 years being dragged away in handcuffs. She had done it. Not because a man had saved her, not because the system had worked the way it was supposed to, because she had refused to stop existing. Diana appeared beside her, eyes wide with amazement and exhaustion. "So," Diana said, "how do you feel?" Grace looked at her friend. Then she felt something shift in her abdomen, a familiar tightening, a wave of pressure that had nothing to do with emotions. "Honestly," Grace said, "I think my water just broke." Diana stared at her. "You are joking." "I really wish I was. Somebody call an ambulance." The gala dissolved into a different kind of chaos, and Grace Holloway, surrounded by the ruins of her husband's empire, began to laugh. Mount Sinai Hospital was quiet at 4 in the morning. Grace lay in a private room, exhausted and glowing, holding a tiny bundle against her chest. Her daughter had arrived screaming into the world just before midnight, pink and perfect and absolutely furious about being born. "She gets that from you?" Diana had observed from the chair beside the bed. The righteous fury. Grace had laughed, too tired to argue. Now Diana was asleep in that same chair, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, still wearing the dress she had worn to the gala. Ruth had been wheeled to a room down the hall, finally resting after the longest night of her life. Carolyn had sent an enormous bouquet of flowers that took up half the windowsill. And Grace was alone with her daughter. She traced the curve of the baby's cheek, marveling at the perfection of tiny fingers curled into tiny fists. So small, so fierce, so completely hers. "I am going to name you Helen," Grace whispered, "for the woman who deserved to see this moment, for all the women who never got to see their children grow up." The baby made a soft sound, somewhere between a sigh and a protest. "I know." Grace smiled through her tears. "It is a lot of responsibility, but I think you can handle it." She looked out the window at the city lights beginning to fade as dawn approached. "This is the moment I want you to remember if you have stayed with me this long. Not the victory, though that mattered. Not the justice, though that mattered too. This is the moment I want you to carry with you. You are not defined by what happens to you. You are defined by what you do next." 3 months later, the headlines read, "Nathaniel Vale convicted on 47 counts of fraud. Facing life in prison. Cold case reopened. Former tech CEO charged with murder of first wife. Vale Industries dissolved. Assets distributed to defrauded investors. Grace Holloway named Woman of the Year by Forbes." Grace did not attend the Forbes ceremony. She was in Ohio, at the nursing home, sitting beside Ruth's bed while Helen slept in her arms. Ruth was having a good day. She had recognized Grace immediately, had reached for Helen with trembling hands and held her great-great-granddaughter with the careful reverence of a woman who understood miracles. "You did it," Ruth said softly. "You fought back." Grace leaned against her grandmother's shoulder. "I had help," Ruth smiled. "We all need help." The trick is finding people worth trusting. They sat together in comfortable silence. 3 generations of Holloway women, survivors, all of them, warriors in their own ways. When Grace finally left, it was with a promise to return soon and a certainty that some bonds could never be broken. 1 year later, Grace opened her own firm, Holloway Forensic Consulting, specializing in helping women uncover financial abuse and divorces. Diana worked in the office next door, handling the legal referrals. Caroline ran operations with the efficiency of someone who had spent 15 years managing chaos. Marlene stopped by regularly with homemade cookies and advice. Marcus Reed had provided the initial investment, then stepped back. No romance, no savior narrative, just respect between equals who had fought the same battles on different fronts. In its first year, the firm helped 47 women escape financially abusive marriages. Grace kept a running count on a whiteboard in her office. Every time they closed a case, she added another number, another life reclaimed, another truth that refused to stay buried. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Not that good always wins, because sometimes it does not. Not that there is always a hero waiting, because sometimes there is not. What I want you to know is this: your truth has power, even when no one believes you, even when the world calls you crazy, even when the man with all the money controls the narrative. Your truth still exists, and if you keep telling it, to one person, then two, then 10, eventually the lie collapses. It cannot help but collapse. Because lies need constant maintenance. Truth just needs time. Grace's office was quiet on a Tuesday evening. Helen was with Diana, enjoying her regular babysitting session that mostly involved Diana letting a 1-year-old destroy her apartment while making ridiculous faces. Grace was finishing paperwork, ready to call it a night. The phone rang. Holloway Forensic Consulting. A pause. Then a voice, small and scared and achingly familiar. Is this Grace? Grace Holloway? Yes, this is Grace. How can I help you? My name is Sarah Mitchell. The woman's voice cracked. I found your website. I read your story. And I think I am in a situation like the one you were in. Grace sat up straighter, her attention fully focused. Tell me about it, Sarah. My husband is a tech executive. He controls all our money. He monitors my phone. He convinced all our friends that I am unstable. He threatened my mother. He made me sign papers I did not understand. Everyone thinks he is wonderful, Sarah's voice broke. He told me no one would ever believe me. Grace felt the familiar anger rise in her chest. Not the destructive kind, the kind that got things done. Sarah? She said softly. I believe you. A sob came through the phone. You do? Yes? And I want you to know something important. Grace looked at the whiteboard on her wall. 47 names, 47 women who had trusted her with their stories. Tomorrow would make 48. You are not crazy, Grace said. You are not imagining things. You are not too sensitive. The confusion you feel? That is by design. It is how people like him keep people like us trapped. She leaned forward, her voice steady and sure. But here's the truth, Sarah. You are not trapped anymore. You called me. That was the first step. Now we take the second one together. What is the second step? Grace smiled, thinking of Ruth and Diana and Caroline and all the women who had helped her find her way out of the dark. The second step is telling your story. All of it. Every detail you can remember. Sarah's breath caught. And then, Grace said, we start planning how to get you free. On the other end of the line, Sarah Mitchell started to cry. But this time, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of hope. And hope, Grace had learned, was where everything began. Later that night, after Sarah's call had ended with a scheduled meeting and a promise of help, Grace stood at the window of her office, looking out at the city lights. Manhattan sparkled below, the same city that had once felt like a prison. Now it felt like a beginning. Her phone buzzed. A text from Diana. Helen just said, Mama. I have it on video. Also, she threw applesauce at my wall. You owe me paint. Grace laughed out loud. She had lost so much over the past 2 years: her marriage, her reputation, her certainty about who she could trust. But she had gained more: a daughter who would grow up knowing what strength looked like, a community of women who had her back, a purpose that got her out of bed every morning, a voice that would not be silenced. The end of one story was always the beginning of another, and Grace Holloway's story was just getting started. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse, financial abuse, or coercive control, you are not alone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 1-800-79-97233. Your truth has power. Keep telling it. If this story resonates with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, do me a small favor. Drop a comment below. Tell me your favorite moment, or simply write the word strong so I know you made it to the end. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it tells the algorithm to share this message with more women who need it. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. I tell stories like this every week. Stories about women who refused to stay silent, women who took back their power, women who proved that the ending does not have to be the one someone else wrote for them. Share this video with one person. Just one. You never know who is sitting in silence right now, waiting for proof that escape is possible. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Now let us begin. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and inspiration. Every story we share is crafted with purpose to remind you that your voice matters and your truth deserves to be heard.